I'm Kanan Chandran, publisher of Storm Asia, and welcome to this WED Web Chat on protecting your brand. This series of webinars is part of Storm Asia's discussions on trending and topical issues, where we bring together panelists from a variety of disciplines to discuss a common topic. Brands surround us from the moment you wake up to the moment you sleep. You are in contact with brands. You see so many different brands out there. Some of them are so common, you accept them. Some are new, refreshing, maybe pay a bit more attention to them. Some brands have lasted centuries, but many of the more popular ones seem to have certainly come up in the recent decades. Now, beyond the logo and your brand name, brands are associated with the products or services offered. You want your brand to have immediate recall for your customers. So a brand like Apple, Google, Disney, Amazon, Samsung, Nike, BMW. Must say that, because we've got somebody from BMW in today's panel. And definitely worthy of mention. These are all brands easily associated with products they produce and services they offer. Now, having built up their respective brand reputations, there's a lot at stake and a lot that could be lost should your reputation be shaken. And in today's world where everything is so fast, something happening somewhere in a small part, in a small way somewhere in the world could influence it as well. So now, how do brands then protect their reputation? And that's today's discussion, right? What are the measures you can use to protect your position? And how important is brand to organizations that are starting up? Our panelists today will be from different industries. Okay, we've got Miss Claudia Wieshuber. She's the director of marketing at BMW ASIA, and she's been with BMW Group since 2003. She was part of the team who developed the concept of the BMW Welt in Munich. Wonderful building. I was there at the opening. Really enjoyed walking around and exploring it. She developed the communication and brand strategy for BMW and BMW I, and has extensive knowledge of BMW luxury class communication strategy. She has also worked in Beijing and is now based in Singapore since September last year. Rick Kobak Song is a country brand advisor and author. He's a former journalist who's written, I think, something like 40 books, maybe more, and counting. He's currently working on 3, he says. He's an author and editor of Brand Singapore, which is on Singapore's country brand, which is now in its 3rd edition and was first published in 2011. We are supposed to have Samir Dixit on the panel. He hasn't shown up yet. Maybe he's delayed and will join in later. So let's kick off the discussion by asking the panelists what they consider as key ingredients of a brand that must be protected at all costs. Claudia, shall we kick that off with you?
I'd love to. I think I would love to start with, if you made it as a brand, I always feel you are a feeling. If people start connecting a feeling and an attitude, a set of values with you, then that is a pretty good indication that you really have a solid and strong brand that is also important in this day and age, because it also provides orientation. And of course, the brand toolkit, I would say that's the basic, what everybody would know, would always have some visual representation and would most likely have also something like a claim and a promise that it stands for. But ultimately, of course, it's the sum of all the touch points that one individual might have with the brand, and that includes all the dreams around it. So ideally, a brand is a feeling, I think.
Okay, that's quite nebulous, right? If it's just a feeling, which makes it even more challenging to protect, I would think.
It definitely is, I would say. It's a very difficult and challenging undertaking to actually keep your brand relevant and protecting it at the same time, because being a relevant brand implies that it needs to be adaptable to people's needs and feelings on a global scale, on an individual scale. So definitely a lot of flexibility also needed. Otherwise, a brand is just a sort of token that sits on the shelf and is rather dull and dead, which most brands definitely are not. So yes, it's walking a fine line of being flexible enough to be relevant for people, for cultures, for situations in life, but then also be stable enough to be recognizable.
Hmm. Were you always fascinated by brands and what they represented? Um, and once you got into a brand, did your thinking about it change?
I think I was really always interested and fascinated how to make people feel something. And if you look, I mean, nowadays books on mindfulness and how to be in the moment and how to lead a meaningful life very much circle around this of not just being there and being a part of something, but owning a moment, of owning your life, owning everything that you want to be, that you want to stand for. So I find that a very important and very relevant interaction between people, but then, of course, also between brands and people and their customers, because the last thing all of us want is to waste our time with experiences, with people, with whatever it might be, or finding that it is hollow what we're dealing with. We always, I think, baseline for most of us is we would love to engage in meaningful interaction and to add purpose to our life, to know our reason why, and to experience exactly what we would love to get out of this life. And also what we probably most of us consider a successful life would be that, a life lived to the fullest. And brands can definitely add to that, or also subtract from that. If it's empty promises, if you feel my time is not wisely spent, then you would probably not continue the relationship with a person or a brand. So in the end, ultimately, it needs to be worthwhile spending your time with. We need to provide added value. And yes, when I started in BMW, I learned a lot more of what a brand can actually be in people's lives. So it's not just the product. Definitely, I mean, also common knowledge, definitely most brands started as product brands. So you would always associate the product, in our case, the car, with a brand. But I think our brands are our cars are really, really good and really lovely. But if the brand doesn't match, if the set of value doesn't match to your set of value, I think it would be still a reason for people to just make a different choice, to go to some different brand and cars.
So does heritage matter more than the product today or service provided today? What role does heritage have to play in the brand appreciation? Uh, I ask that because BMW has always been associated with performance, right? The ultimate luxury performance machine. And then, of course, it has to be renewed, right? It has to be refreshed. It has to look different. So when the big grills came out, people were a bit, So you get that issue with people having different perspectives on a sudden dramatic change in look and feel. Now, how does that affect the brand?
I personally feel that one way to protect a brand is to make sure that it stays relevant, and that has the pain of renewing products and renewing icons and renewing brands or evolving as organization, but evolve also as a brand. it needs to be done. I always smile when things happen, like renowned brands touch their logo, like happened to Jaguar. And it was a public outcry, as if everybody was personally hurt. But that just goes to show how important brands are and how dear brands are to people's hearts. Brands give stability and brands give orientation, especially in these volatile times. And it is a very painful process and a very dangerous process to keep the brand relevant, to keep it alive, to keep it modern, which involves evolving the design language, evolving also the representation of the logo, making it modern, making it appeal to the modern eye, but also to the modern eye in 5 years' time. You don't want to be in a position that all of a sudden something that represents the brand looks outdated. This might be any type of the CI toolbox element. It might be the logo itself. It might be the products, the cars in our case. So yes, normally you have to move on, and just as the brand has, and here the legacy comes in, just as the brand has forged its way from becoming known, coming from complete nowhere to becoming a known brand, it was also a brand moving forward. So you just have to keep on moving, and you have to pave the way for your fans and all the hearts to follow along. But it's definitely it's our responsibility to keep moving the brand into the future and not let it happen that it is stuck somewhere in its own legacy.
BMW and many brands, it's a very global, international world now, right? And many brands are being acquired by other companies in other countries. So, how does culture influence a brand? So, even in the case of the BMW Group, you've acquired Rolls-Royce and Mini, and these are brands from the UK, right, originated in the UK. Do you then protect the brand in a different way, because you are now taking a foreign brand per se and making it part of your group?
Being a global brand always sounds like it's one brand, but then I feel it is a brand that needs to be working in several. Yeah, I think we have 140 markets, so let's just say it's 140 mentalities and sets of values and whatever. So the brand needs to work there on the ground always. And I think personally that the safest and strongest way to make this work is that you know your reason why, that every brand has their reason why and what you want to stand for. In our case is emotion. I take big pride in the fact that BMW has always been around emotions, about Freude, joy, which is of course one of also the core feelings that everybody in life is trying to have and aspire for yourself. So it is quite a privilege to be a guardian of joy in a way. But as long as you have that as a common knowledge of everybody, of all the teams on the ground, that everybody has a solid feeling, gut feeling, and instinct, what we stand for, that we all know what we want to leave our customers with, what it should feel like to be in touch with BMW, to drive a car or to be at the dealership, or even if you have a complaint or anything that is unpleasant, what should it feel like if this is an interaction with BMW? As long as you have a solid feeling for that, all around the globe, you're safe with your brand, I would say. And when it comes to building a family of brands, of course, there's a bigger chance in spreading out to a broad variety of target groups. I mean, even in BMW, we have BMW I and M, which is also a good chance of delivering what different mindsets are looking for. But then including Mini and Rolls-Royce, of course, is, I would think the bracket is we want to deliver individual mobility that is outstanding. That stands true for all three brands. And then we have our own, like, I don't want to call it niches, but our own stages where we excel for each of the brands, because we have our profiles and our promises.
Yeah, Rick, what are your thoughts? I mean, having dealt with country brands, right? And sometimes brands represent a country, just like BMW is Germany, Jaguar is the UK. How does a country brand influence or shape perceptions of a brand internationally?
Before I address that, allow me to share a few thoughts about the differences and similarities between corporate and country branding. For a corporate brand, and we can look at it both in terms of the internal and external dimensions. For a corporate brand, internally, if something doesn't work, a car model doesn't sell, the marketing manager is not up to scratch, we can change the model, we can sack the manager. But for a country, you can't do that. The product is the entire country, everything in it and everything about it, and you can't sack any citizen. Earlier, Claudia talked a fair bit about feelings and emotions, and in branding and brand building, that's absolutely important. Now, if we look at the external dimension of country branding, you are actually dealing with the feelings and emotions of everyone else in the world. For a corporate brand, you have your competitors, and essentially you want to speak to your past, present, and future customers, your market segment. But for a country brand, you're actually dealing with everyone else in the world. And to address your question, Kanan, and the main question in today's webinar, which is protection. I think for a country brand, there is actually very little that you can do to specifically and directly protect. You essentially have to go with the flow and focus on what you can do. There's a lot that you cannot do. So country brand is, I often say, is the control freak's nightmare. Because ideally, you want to change the perception, the thinking, and the feeling of everyone else in the world about your country brand. But it's obviously impossible to do that. So if you were to try to directly attempt to protect your brand, like, for example, if there's a foreign media article that's critical of your country brand, and you go and put out a point-by-point rebuttal and demand publication in that media, first of all, there could be the Streisand effect. Only the normal consumers of that media would know about it. But if you go and do something like that, you attract more media coverage, and more people will know about the original criticism, and they'll form their own thoughts and feelings about that. It is there's a term which I coined in my book, Brand Singapore, Kanan, which you mentioned earlier, which is this what I call the brand keloids. These are negative impressions about a country brand that are so deep that it's like a physical keloid, a scar which stays with you. And now, if you would try to expressly try to remove that scar, such as directly addressing direct criticism, it could be costly, it could be painful, and it could take time. It's much better to focus on continuously creating and presenting positive content, not to try to directly address the negative content. And after all, you're dealing with everyone, the perceptions, feelings, and emotions of everyone else in the world. And the world is so multifaceted. There are so many constituencies and groups. And what happens most of the time actually is a country brand has many sub brands, and each sub brand speaks to its market segment.
You're basically saying don't chase after the people who say bad things about you as a country, but keep pushing positive things out there. That works if you've got the media in your pocket, which many countries do. But in the current state where you've got social media, which is so big and wide, it's hard to hide things or to try and push your thing across.
It's about brand awareness, which is the beginning of any brand building. Because quite often for a country brand, and I'm speaking specifically from like for if you take Singapore as an example, there's a fair bit of criticism which is based on ignorance. People still having ideas entrenched in their hearts and minds from 30 years ago. The things ideas about caning, chewing gum, and so on, which are Singapore's brand keloids. So it's not about hiding anything, but making people more aware of how things have changed. Like for example, many people used to think that Singapore is a very a sterile place. There's nothing much to do, but that's an idea from like decades ago. Anyone who has visited recently or has kept in touch with what's happening will know that Singapore has changed a lot in this way. Its nightlife is ranked among the highest in Asia in quite a few polls. For example, so it's a question of putting more of this content out, and so that there is greater awareness, and over time, what is the reality, the updated reality, will form more people's impressions than outdated perceptions from literally from decades ago.
So one way of protecting the brand, then the country brand, would then be trying to improve things as they are, right? Improve on what's available. So as you talk about nightlife and you talk about culture, actually, not just the pubs and all that kind of stuff, but the theater, the concerts, and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's layering on more positive stuff and working with a positive spin on things rather than just dwelling on things that people would like to dwell on, right? Does that work though in terms of protecting the overall brand as you do it over time? Is that something which has to be continuously done in order to protect the country brand's image?
Country branding is about promotion. Protection doesn't even come into it very much because of the vastness of the audience and the multifaceted nature of the content, and and also its dynamic nature. I think the idea of protection comes from corporate branding, where because you're dealing with a more focused uh, set of products, market segments, and audiences, you're better able to measure. I know in the corporate world, measurement is very important. Even in the public sector, like Singapore's civil service has adopted many of these corporate practices. Everyone has KPIs, key performance indicators, to meet, and they're all driven by that. And that I think is one of the root causes for politicians and civil servants to disregard country branding. The reality is that very few politicians and civil servants actually even understand branding. They're actually doing marketing, but they think that's branding. They reduce brand building to a corporate gift. when it's much, much larger than that. It's about your entire image and reputation. And everyone and anything could have an influence on it. I like to think of um, country brands being built by three activities. They all start with D. One is branding by design, one is branding by default, and the third is branding by diffusion. Now, branding by design is what we all are familiar with, and it's the closest to corporate branding. For example, a Singapore Airlines ad about its new flight to Berlin. That's branding by design, very deliberate, visible. We all know what that is. Branding by default is like, for instance, recently we've had monsoon surges in Singapore.
Mhm.
I mean, if these become worse and more frequent, it will affect our country brand. People might reconsider visiting or even working here if our weather is so unpredictable and not the perpetual summer that it used to be. That's branding by default. The things acts of God that you can't do anything about. The third is branding by diffusion, and this idea came to me when I visited Poland last year and visited the Raffles Hotel in Warsaw. Now, Singapore sold the Raffles brand in 2006, and ever since then, I was very sad because we lost control of one of our three main brand assets. The other two being Singapore Airlines and Tiger Beer. Tiger Beer was also sold. We've only got SIA left. And I was sad for more than 20 years until I was stood in the lobby of the Raffles Hotel in Warsaw and saw above the front desk a clock showing the time in Singapore, and below that, the time in Poland. And I also visited the Long Bar and saw that they sold the Singapore Sling with a write up about its history. I cheered up for the first time because I realized that the Raffles Hotel, now owned by a French hotel group, has changed hands three times since 2006. It has been helping to build Singapore's brand for the more than 20 years without anyone in Singapore having to do anything about it. That's branding by diffusion, a reputation that takes on a life of its own.
So I'm asking in terms of somebody trying to set up something. Now, if I want to set this up, uh, what should I be mindful of? The brand may still be new, may not be known. How much importance should I place on building the brand versus, say, delivering a service or developing a product? Uh, how would you prioritize that?
I think really, especially if you're aspiring to build up a brand, one thing that needs to be very crystal clear is the reason why. Why should people go to your service and not to probably 5 or 6 other that might be offering the same or sort of the same and are already known? Because especially at the beginning, I think when you cannot bank on a brand, when you cannot bank on being known and already having a good cushion of trust, it needs to be very clear why someone should choose you. And as I said earlier, I think the reason why then also carries you through the times, if it's a good one. And I heard from Apple that they were at a certain size of the company. They felt that they have lost their reason why. So they actually had to bring Steve Jobs back into the company because he was the carrier of the why. He had the original idea. So he was the bearer of the brand flame. And with him having left, too many people too far off the original idea, they felt that they were losing track. So I think this is something that, especially for a young brand, for a new brand, yes, you need to do the normal things that everybody would think of, like having a CI, having a toolbox of all the things like your claim and your set of corporate colors and your recognizability and your claim. And maybe there's corporate architecture or whatever is applicable for whatever you want to achieve, and what toolbox, how big your toolbox needs to be. But if you're not crystal clear around how you bring added value to people's lives, you will have it very hard, I think. I love very much what you said, and especially the fact that in the end, the Ruffles Hotel going around the world and getting the life of its own, I think that's what at some point in time inevitably happens when you're building also, or especially the corporate brands, because when we are all going around the world and when our cars are being representing the brand and you have no clue who is driving that car, it might be reckless driving, it might be whatever. So at some point in time, inevitably you have to let it go like a child. You have to have, you have to admit, or you have to let it have its life on its own. But that is also what then brings the magic, that you have so many touch points all around the world, and you see the brand just being part of life. And probably because the main topic is protecting the brand, this is exactly where you cannot protect everything around the brand. You have to balance the brand being a living thing versus the brand being static. As I said, put it in the shelf and not having a life on its own. There's this lovely saying of keeping the fire alive versus guarding the ashes. That's a little bit probably the nice image behind.
Okay, there's a question here which can bring in that last thought. What makes a brand look modern, and what do you consider outdated? I'd like to ask that in the context of, if you want to rebrand yourself, how do you protect your inherent value which you have, which could be lost in a rebranding exercise?
I think one example that is relatively old for BMW, and I might not be 100% sure, but I think it was 2007. BMW, which stands for driving, quit Formula One to save all the millions of money used to perfection the feeling of racing and the knowledge and the technology that we definitely gained. A lot of excellence we gained around driving and drivability and racing, to reinvest all these millions into sustainability. It was a conscious move, and it was a big move. It's the signs of the times. In a way, it's not reinventing yourself, but taking our customers on the journey would probably be the best way to put it. Here, I would a little bit disagree with what we heard, Rick, what you said earlier. We are not only talking, or any brand, that's not only about BMW, any brand is not only talking to their customers, but any brand is talking to everybody. And there's a lot of dreamers out there who would love to be part of any type of lifestyle, be it the Ruffles lifestyle, be it the Singapore lifestyle, because Singapore has a beautiful image these days of really being a very glamorous and wonderful city. So a lot of people who are at some other parts of the world might hear Singapore and just dream of one day being there, as well as we have a lot of young kids having posters of BMWs in their room.
What I've heard a lot is on the equity creation side, and in our line of work, I mean, when you're talking about protection, I don't think that's the right context to look at protection. So yes, building equity is more to drive equity for the brand. People prefer it, people like it, etc. But that's all in the marketing realm. I'll just use an example. Do you lock your door in the night, and that's protection? Whereas building equity means my house looks pretty, the interiors are nice, people like it when they come, they feel warm and welcome. That's all equity. When we're talking about protection, equity has a very tiny role in protection. And when I say protection, I don't need protection, legal protection. We mean protection from all the reputational risks that the brand may get impacted by in the short term or the long term. And how do you mitigate some of those elements so that the brand remains protected? Now, for example, an airline crashes, right? That can seriously damage the reputation of the brand. How do you protect that? And I'll use a very good example. And there was a Thai airline crash that happened, I think, almost over a decade ago. What is the first thing that they did? And I would really commend someone for thinking on their feet. They went and quickly painted the logo of the plane black, the crashed aircraft. They went and quickly painted the tail of the aircraft black so that no video footage could capture which airline it was. That's a very good example of protecting your brand when things go south. We were talking about Singapore as a country, right? Chewing gum banning is not diluting a brand. It's saying we are particular about everything that we do in Singapore. In many ways, a lot of people see that as a big positive also. But when you talk about corruption not being tolerated, that's building equity for Singapore as a country and building its soft power. That's not protecting the brand in any way whatsoever. Soft power does protect the brand, but in a very, very tiny way. Brand protection comes from when you have proper governance processes in place in the organization, in the country, which really look at what are we doing that we must do right in ABC manner and what we must never do in order to make sure that my reputation does not get tarnished. For example, me as an individual, right? I'm dressed very nicely and people, when they see me from far or when they come near me, they like my appearance. That's building my equity. I talk to them about my professional work and that's building my equity. And suddenly I start abusing them. That's damaging my reputation. So reputation is all about behavior of the organization. It's about the governance. And that very strictly vests in few things. One is, do you even have a brand governance process within the organization? What are the risks that you're mitigating? Brand gets impacted by reputational risk. Brand gets impacted by financial risk. Brand gets impacted by strategic risk. Brand gets impacted by operational risk. When we talk about protecting the brand, do you have a framework that helps you mitigate all these risks? And if not, and if you only have a process which is called marketing, and if you only have a process which is called brand building, and then you, depending on you testing your equity and measuring your equity out there, then you're not protecting your brand adequately. At the same time, if you just focus on, oh, I registered my brand and all the legal elements are secure, then also you're protecting it, but only legally, not operationally, not reputationally, not in a true governance manner. So I think brand protection is something that's been often misunderstood. And again, I can say that with a lot of experience. I've been advising senior boards of Fortune 500 companies. I must have advised at least 200-300 over the last decade and a half. When I worked in Standard Chartered, I used to manage the brand globally. Even large organizations like that, they do not have a fundamental understanding of what protection is all about, especially with regards to brand. There's a massive amount of risk framework that they have to mitigate the financial risk, regulatory risk. Brand also comes under all those, but there's nobody who's really looking at it from a risk mitigation point of view. So when we talk about protection is something saying, how do I make sure that my brand doesn't get exposed to all kind of different risks? And biggest risk is caused by the employees. They are going and doing things that may not be acceptable to the organization. We hear more often than not, so-and-so from a company did this, or, there's physical abuse happening in the organization, or the child labor being used, or there is, people are suing each other for, sexual harassment. Those are all reputation damaging events for the brand, particularly, not so much for the organization, but for the brand. So when we talk about protection, I think the context is more important, and the context must not sway towards marketing or brand building, must not go towards logo creation and logo protection. It must stay in the realm of governance, because that is the most crucial element of brand protection, which then translates into, if I have good governance frameworks, I will manage my reputation better, I will manage my risk better, I will operational risk, financial risk, all kind legal risk, all kind of risks are mitigated And when you have these, then you are protecting the brand adequately. And if you don't have these, then sadly you're not. No matter how high your equity, you may be the most loved brand in the world, but you're not protecting yourself adequately.
So what needs to be done then? What would you say is sort of a key or critical factor that you need to address in terms of brand protection?
I think when it's a protection, everyone's sort of red lights go up saying, oh, am I legally protected or not? I think first and foremost, move beyond legal protection. That's just the starting point. You've created a brand, you've protected legally. Then what? The brand gets tarnished and damaged every single day that it operates out in the market. And that will only be protected when you have a brand governance framework in place, which the measures are more vested in which of my actions or initiatives are impacting the business as a result of brand not being protected. I'll give you a very recent example. There was a big fire in Malaysia. One Petronas pipeline is on fire.
Yeah.
Massive. Now that would cause pollution. That would cause a whole lot of other things. People might die there. That's a serious brand risk. And it's a serious business risk. But the first risk that you need to mitigate is brand risk. Because people are going to start slamming your name out there in the media. So what measures do you take? How quickly do you take them? Really then matters. Are you ready for a fallout of any sort, any kind? The PR people will definitely have to get involved because that's where the brand operates. Social media plays a very critical role. What are your policies? And again, when we talk to companies, everyone has guidelines. Very few or almost none have policies. Guidelines are just guidelines. They're left for employees to follow or not to follow. I created the brand governance policy in Standard Chartered 20 years ago. Policy means every single employee in the organization must follow it by law, by the terms of your appointment. So if you're doing those kind of things, and that's the whole intent of the Brand Protection Congress is, yes, there's a legal side of it that the whole world is so well aware, but how do you see the other side of the coin, which is the governance, which is the business management, which is the growth? How does the brand protection link to growth? How does it link to your competitiveness? How does it link to your revenue generation? How does it link to share price increase? How does it link to investor return? All those things are hugely, hugely dependent on how well you protect your brand or not. So we're just trying to always saying, think beyond what you know. And think in a more holistic manner. Always think of not just your research report and your marketing function, but think about everything that a company does impacts the value of the company, whether to go up or to go down. And when I say everything, I literally mean every single thing. I can put a dollar value to if the 5 senior management people are on a plane to attend a conference, I can put a dollar value to that also. Will it increase the value of the company or will it decrease the value of the company? And even that is saying, am I protecting the value of the company by doing this activity or initiative or by being out there or not? So everything must have a protection element as a consideration factor to every single decision making. And a lot of people might think, oh, we already have it, but no, you don't. I think brand training is important, but I think the context gets lost there. And everyone does brand training for, you must know about the brand, you must know about what our colors are, you must know what our value proposition is, you must know what our positioning is, and so on and so forth. And I think that's really taking it completely in the wrong direction. And when I say completely in the wrong direction, it really means you're supposed to go north, but you're going east instead of going north. So when you're talking about protection, the single underlying factor is governance. So are you training them for proper brand governance? And I think that's really where the difference emerges. When you're not training them to say, how do I measure the brand? How do I measure my equity? How do I measure whether people like me or not? How do I use the brand to sell more products? No, because the more products you sell, and if you don't have proper protections and processes in place, the more damage will occur in the long run. Mis-selling, for example, is a massive issue with lots of companies, especially like insurance companies, and a lot of mis-selling, misrepresentation. And I think those are the things that when you're doing training, I think those are the things that must be factored into the training to say, what are we doing? What processes do we have in order to mitigate A, B, and C? And then use that to say, and by mitigating these, we're going to increase the equity of the brand. So this is not about just greenwashing the whole brand agenda, but really taking the bull by the horn and saying, I have a process. I mean, take ESG, for example, just because there are regulators are breathing down everyone's neck, you must publish a report, you must do this. There's a governance process that exists there. But does a governance process exist for brand? No, it doesn't. So even when people are training, and everyone is training, trust me, everyone is training. We get called in like literally 5 times a week to say, hey, can you come and do our brand training? And then we say, what do you want us to train? Train them about how to use my brand, how to be compliant with the guidelines, how to do this. No, that's not protection.
But thanks again to Claudia Wieshuber from BMW ASIA, Rick Kobak Song, author of many books, including Country Branding for Singapore, and Samir Dixit, who's global head of Acorn Management Consulting, among many other things. Essentially, I think a brand lives, breathes, and you've got to react to it, and you've got to react to the environment as well. And bear in mind what keeps a brand relevant, what keeps the value intact, and act accordingly. You've got to do sometimes the tough stuff to make sure that your brand remains vibrant and relevant for a long period of time.